Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The midday sun burned fiercely over the chaotic heart of Lagos as traders yelled prices and buses honked with no mercy. The air was thick with smoke, sweat, and the scent of roasted plantains and peppered meat. But even in all the noise, whenever she appeared, silence always followed, like a bad omen drifting in. Her name wasn't known, but everyone called her a Muoza, which meant the one who sees demons. Barefoot and wrapped in stained, tattered ankara, she walked with a baby tied crookedly to her back, the child's soft cries blending into the noise of the market. Her eyes darted with wild paranoia, her tangled hair knotted with bits of thread and sticks, and her lips constantly moved as though she was arguing with ghosts. Children ran at the sight of her. Even the boldest conductors who insulted police officers for moving buses would shrink back and curse under their breath if she crossed their path. It wasn't just madness that frightened them. It was the way she carried it. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She roared like a wounded lioness, striking out with sticks, stones, or bare fists if anyone came too close. She once tore a fruit seller's tray in half for refusing to give her water. Since then, that entire side of the market kept their wares tightly packed and crossed to the other side when she approached. Women spat behind her, claiming she had been cursed by her ancestors. One man whispered she once ate a live rat. Another swore he saw her sleep in a graveyard with the baby still on her back. Whatever the stories were, they kept people away. But in truth, her madness was her armor, and the baby her shield. No one knew who the baby's father was, nor how long she had carried it on her back. The cloth was often dirty, sometimes soaked, sometimes loose, but she never let go. Even when she stormed at people with sticks or trash, she shielded the child's head with her hands. Sometimes she sat beneath the broken signpost near the open gutter, muttering names and whispering lullabies to the child. Zikora, Zikora, Mama loves you. Don't listen to them. They don't see you. They only see madness. Then she would burst into laughter or tear at her clothes. But no matter how far gone her mind seemed, there was one thing she always did with painful consistency. She fed the baby before herself. She'd dig through waste, scavenge cold bread, or steal boiled egg yolks just to put something in the child's mouth. The child barely cried anymore, just wide eyes, constantly watching the world that rejected his mother. But on this particular day, everything changed. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her lips were cracked, her ribs visible beneath the faded wrapper that hung loosely on her bones. The baby whimpered. Her mind buzzed, hot and angry, her stomach a well of fire. She wandered through the alleys of Victoria Island, her bare feet cut by broken bottles and sharp gravel. People screamed at her to leave. A man sprayed her with a hose. But she kept walking, guided not by reason, but instinct. Then she saw it, a large golden plate sitting on a table outside an expensive restaurant. A tall, powerful-looking man in a cream-colored senator outfit sat relaxed, slicing grilled chicken with a silver fork. His smile was calm, his gold wristwatch glinting under the sun. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. With a sudden snarl, she charged forward like a lioness in heat. Patrons screamed. Chairs fell. Plates clattered. She yanked the chicken straight from the billionaire's hand, tore off a piece, and shoved it into the baby's mouth. The child suckled eagerly. She backed away slowly, eyes flaming, crouched like a wild animal ready to strike again. The billionaire stood frozen, chicken grease still on his fingers, staring, not with anger, but with confusion and a strange, unexplainable familiarity. The commotion didn't end when the madwoman snatched the food. For hours afterward, the street buzzed with shock and gossip. Waiters mumbled about resigning. Onlookers who had recorded the scene played the footage again and again, shaking their heads in disbelief. She could have had a knife, someone whispered. What if she had a disease? Another added. Yet in the middle of the storm sat Chief Damien Obasai, silent, thoughtful, his hand still lifted halfway between his lap and his plate. His guests urged him to resume eating, but he excused himself and left in a sleek black SUV. Meanwhile, the madwoman melted into the crowd, baby still pressed to her back, her lips muttering things that sounded like hymns. No one dared follow her. Children who had once made fun of her now crossed the road when they saw her from a distance. Market women who had labeled her possessed tightened their wrappers and called on the blood of Jesus when she walked past. Even stray dogs avoided her space. Something about her wasn't just unstable, it was haunting. There was too much pain behind her outbursts, too much sorrow in her silence. But no one cared to look deeper. She had made her home beside a stinking refuse dump just off an abandoned kiosk. The tin roof was rusted, the wood eaten by termites, but it was the only cover she had. Every night she would crouch in the corner, wrapping herself and the baby in a torn mosquito net, holding the child as though she feared he would be stolen by spirits. Sometimes she would rise in the middle of the night, run into the street, and shout, "Stay away! I told you! Don't take my baby!" Her voice, cracked and loud, echoed off nearby buildings. Residents who lived close had learned to sleep with earplugs or blast music to drown her out. She often fought invisible enemies, swinging sticks at the air, warning imaginary thieves not to take Zachora. And during the day, she prowled the city like a wounded beast, eyes bloodshot, clothes damp from street water, hunger painting her body with shadows. No one gave her anything, not a kobo, not a glance. They had all written her off as a madwoman destined to die in the gutters with her bastard child. What they didn't know, what no one cared to ask, was how she got there in the first place. And yet, every now and then, fragments of her true self surfaced. She would hum lullabies that sounded too educated, too elegant for her current state. She whispered words that came from a distant memory. "Oh, Amara, the day we danced in the rain." She would pause mid-sentence, confused, then laugh bitterly. A few people overheard her and found it strange. One Kiki writer swore he once heard her recite a full poem in English about lost stars and rising suns. Another woman who had come to throw out garbage said she saw her teaching the child to count. "She day teach baby alphabet O," the woman said, "but na madness day cover am." No one believed it. They dismissed such stories as hallucinations or pity exaggerations. But there were layers beneath her madness, buried under trauma, hunger, abandonment, and betrayal. She wasn't born mad. Something or someone broke her. Chief Damien Obesai had faced many things in his life: hostile business takeovers, political death threats, and scandals that nearly ruined him. But none had rattled him like the moment that madwoman snatched his chicken. It wasn't the act itself, nor the crowd it drew, but the feeling it left behind. He had stared into her face expecting disgust or rage, but instead, he saw something else. Something familiar. Something ancient. The tremor in her lips, the curve of her chin, the deep hollows beneath her eyes, it lingered in his thoughts long after he left the restaurant. Back in his mansion that night, with the city lights casting golden shadows on his marble floor, he sat alone in his study, unable to sleep. The laughter of the madwoman still echoed in his ears. And that name she had whispered, Amara, was a ghost name. One he had locked away deep in his soul, hidden beneath years of wealth, parties, and loneliness. But now it had returned. Violent, uninvited, demanding answers. His aides tried to shift his attention to other matters, pending deals, political appointments, charity dinners, but he waved them all off. "Find out who she is," he ordered. "That madwoman. I want to know where she sleeps, what she eats, who she was before this madness." They stared at him, confused, but obeyed. In the meantime, Damien returned to the scene. Dressed down in plain clothes and a cap, he sat 2 tables away from where it all happened. He waited. She didn't come. He asked around discreetly. Some laughed. "Baba, forget that one. That woman nah spiritual problem. Nobody one near am." But Damien persisted. After slipping a wad of cash to a timid Kiki rider, he was finally led to the edge of the market, through a narrow gutter-side alley to the filthy shack beside the refuse dump. There he saw her, rocking her baby gently under the torn mosquito net, singing softly, a strange calm in her voice. His feet refused to move. His throat clenched. And then she looked up and met his eyes. And for a second, just a second, time froze. She didn't scream. She didn't lunge. She simply stared, her face unreadable. Then she muttered, "You look like him." Damien's heart slammed in his chest. "Who?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, Deseit," she murmured. "Mama Amara said you had her smile. You're in heaven now," she said. Then she turned away and began humming the same lullaby from the restaurant. Damien stood rooted to the spot, the name Amara, now burning in his chest like fire. Could it be? Was this her daughter? Madness twisted the woman's features, but the resemblance was suddenly unbearable. It was not just the voice or the skin tone, it was the eyes. Those were Amara's eyes. And the bracelet on her wrist, though torn and stained, was the same one he had once given Amara on her 20th birthday. The past had not just returned, it had risen from the grave. Chief Damien sat by the ocean that evening, his back turned to the waves, his thoughts drowning in memory. It had been over 30 years since he'd last seen Amara, yet her presence lived like a pulse in his chest. She was the only woman who had ever made him forget his name, his title, his wealth. She was the only one who had seen the man inside the money. Their love had blossomed in the corridors of their university. She was brilliant, poor, and utterly graceful. He was rich, confident, and lonely. They were an unlikely pair. While others saw her poverty, he saw her potential. While others chased him for money, she challenged his mind. They read books under mango trees. They danced barefoot in the rain. He wrote her poems on his lecture notes. She corrected his grammar with laughter. He bought her a silver bracelet with her name carved on it, Amara, light of my life. He had never removed her from his heart, just buried her there when life forced him to. But love, as pure as it was, could not withstand the weight of his family. His father, Chief Ferdinando Deseit, was a man of empire and control. He believed poor girls were curses. When he found out about Amara, he unleashed his wrath. Damien was summoned, slapped, locked indoors for 3 days. When he still refused to give her up, they used a stronger tactic. They shipped him abroad to complete his studies, cutting off all communication. Every letter Amara wrote was intercepted. Every phone call was blocked. He was told she had married, that she had moved on. He cried for months, in silence, in shame. Then one day, in his final year abroad, he got into a sports accident. It damaged his reproductive system. The doctor said, "You may never father a child." That day, Damien didn't cry, because he believed the child he was meant to have was already lost. Now looking at the madwoman, hearing her whisper "Mama Amara" in broken sentences, seeing that bracelet, Damien's soul began to split open. Could she be his daughter? Could the universe be playing a cruel joke or offering him a second chance? He returned to the shelter the next day. This time he brought food, clothes, and a soft blanket. She did not chase him away. She let him place the food near her. She even took the bottle of clean water and whispered, "Thank you, but don't poison it." Then almost softly, she looked at him and said, "Your voice is loud like Mama's Deseit." Damien's heart cracked open. He crouched before her. "What's your name?" he asked. She smiled, her teeth missing in places, her face smeared with dust. "Chadinma," she said. "But everyone calls me Omoza, because I see the people that left me." And just like that, Damien knew. He knew without a test, without proof. She was his blood. Chief Damien couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the name Chadinma echoed alongside Amara, weaving through the hollow corridors of his memory like a whisper from a life long buried. He rose from his silk sheets before dawn, pacing through the marble halls of his mansion, his bare feet cold against the tiles. The chandelier above didn't matter. The imported paintings didn't matter. Not even the Billionaire estate portfolio lined up on his desk mattered. All he could see was a dirty, barefoot woman with his mother's cheekbones and Amara's voice. The way she said his name, the way she said Mama's Deseit, as if speaking to ghosts. It wasn't possible, yet it was undeniable. There had to be answers, answers his money could not buy. For once, power seemed useless. This was not a boardroom. This was life knocking on the door he had locked for over 3 decades. and it was not leaving without a reckoning. He sent his most trusted investigator to dig deep, not just into the woman, but into the girl named Amara he had once loved. He demanded records from the university. He tracked down former neighbors. He even visited the old hostel Amara lived in, though it was now a crumbling shelter home. A woman who once sold akara near the gate remembered Amara. Ah, that fine girl who used to carry books like a lawyer? She suffered. Oh, they said she got pregnant and disappeared. Poor thing. Very respectful girl. I always wondered what happened to her. Damien's heart sank. She never married, as his family told him. She hadn't moved on. She had waited. And he? He had built empires, hidden his pain behind steel and strategy, and cursed his body when he learned he was sterile, never knowing that somewhere Amara was carrying the only child he'd ever fathered. The guilt wrapped around his chest like a chain. That night, Damien stared at an old photo of Amara he had hidden for years in a locked drawer. She was smiling, radiant, wearing the silver bracelet he had gifted her. The very same bracelet now dulled by grime on Chadinma's wrist. The evidence was overwhelming, but his heart wanted more. He needed truth, not guesses. So he made a quiet decision. He arranged a medical team to retrieve samples from Chadinma discreetly. It took days of patience. He brought food, sat at a distance, talked softly to her like a friend. Eventually, she let the nurse check her baby, and willingly gave her finger for a prick. The blood was sent to the best lab in the country. He waited 3 days, each second dragging like a year. When the call finally came, the doctor's voice was steady. She is your biological daughter, sir. There is no doubt. Damien dropped the phone and fell to his knees, his vision blurred with tears. The girl who snatched bread from his hand wasn't just a madwoman. She was his only child. Damien returned to Chadinma's shack the next morning, but this time, not as a curious stranger. He returned as a father who had lost too much and found something too fragile to let go again. The bracelet shimmered faintly under the sunlight as she stretched her arm to rock her baby. It was coated in dirt, the letters almost unreadable, but he knew those grooves by heart. He had spent days' worth of savings in his youth just to get her that gift. To Amara, my light, it read. Damien's eyes filled with tears as he watched the woman he now knew was his daughter hum a lullaby that mirrored Amara's favorite tune. He didn't interrupt. He couldn't. He simply crouched near her shack and listened, humbled. When she looked up and met his gaze, there was a brief flicker. Something broken, something familiar. You came again, she said softly. But don't take Zakora. People always want to take him. His voice cracked. I won't take him. I promise. I just want to help you. She tilted her head and studied him. Mama said never to trust men with shiny shoes. They lie with their tongues and their gold. Damien slowly removed his shoes. He stood barefoot on the dirt. How about now? He whispered. She blinked, visibly confused. Then she let out a low laugh, a bitter, wild sound. You're funny like him. He made Mama smile. Before she got sick. Before they took him away. Damien's throat tightened. What did she tell you about him? He asked. Chadinma shrugged. That he loved her but chose money. That he was like the sun, warm but too far. Then she rocked her baby and began to hum again. Damien sat there for hours unmoving, absorbing every note of her voice, every flicker of expression. It was Amara's voice, soft, rhythmic, and for the first time in years, he felt home. He made arrangements with a private mental health shelter that night. A discreet one. No press. No noise. He came back the next day with 2 female nurses. Chadinma screamed when they tried to touch her, hitting one with a stick. I knew it. You want to take Zakora? I said no. But Damien intervened. He stepped forward, arms raised. I'm not taking him. I promise. I'll stay with you. You won't go alone. She paused, blinking again. Why do you care? She asked, breathless. He knelt before her and held her hand gently. Because I failed your mother. I left her when she needed me most. And I won't fail you too. Something in his tone, so broken, so desperate, pierced through her fog. After a long silence, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. But If Zecora cries, I'll run away. Damien nodded, unable to speak. As they drove off, he stared out the window, holding his daughter's hand in silence. He was no longer the billionaire, who had everything. He was the father who had lost it all and was finally finding his way back. The silence of the luxury hospital room was broken only by the occasional cooing of baby Zecora. Damien sat in the corner, his hand on his chin, watching Chadinma sleep on the white bed. Her hair had been washed and braided. Her body was bathed, dressed in a simple hospital gown. She looked nothing like the ragged woman who had once snarled at strangers in the market. She looked like Amara, resting, healing, alive. As he watched her, the floodgates of memory opened wide. He saw her mother as clearly as daylight. Amara, the girl with almond eyes, sharp wit, and a fire that refused to bow to anyone. They had met in secondary school. He the rich boy with bodyguards, she the scholarship student with dust on her feet and brilliance in her voice. She was never intimidated by his wealth. She teased him, challenged him, even embarrassed him during debates. But she also loved him in a way no one else ever had, purely, without gain. By the time they reached university, they were inseparable. He would skip classes just to walk her home. She would sneak food into his hostel because he claimed he missed street Accra. Their love became the stuff of legend, though no one believed it would last. Damien was the heir to Obesai Holdings. Amara was an orphan raised by a struggling aunt. They had nothing in common, but everything in heart. And so, when he gave her the silver bracelet on her 20th birthday and whispered, "You'll wear this on our wedding day," she had wept with joy. But joy has a way of offending the proud. His father found out through a family spy and unleashed a storm. Damien was summoned, beaten, locked in the family mansion, and ultimately whisked off to the UK for his own good. Amara had cried at the airport, holding a handwritten letter and a wrapped gift. He never saw either. And so, their story ended not in betrayal, but in interruption. Amara's letters never reached him. His calls were blocked. He was told she had married another, that she had moved on. So he moved on too, but with a broken heart. He immersed himself in business, buried himself in buildings, lands, and shares. But at night he would wake up sometimes, her name on his lips. Even worse, a medical diagnosis a year later crushed him further. A sports injury had rendered him infertile. The doctors said his chances of fathering a child were slim to none. That news killed whatever hope was left in him. He tried IVF. He tried surrogates. He gave up. And now, sitting beside the daughter he never knew existed, watching her sleep with his grandchild beside her, he felt like a beggar who had been handed back everything he ever lost. Only this time, he would not waste it. In the final weeks before Damien was sent abroad, he and Amara lived as though the world had granted them a brief pardon. Every touch, every glance, every kiss carried the weight of urgency. They no longer pretended to have forever. They merely stole each moment like thieves in the night. Damien would sneak out of the Obesai mansion at dawn, disguised in simple clothes, just to spend a few hours lying on Amara's mat as she studied by candlelight. They cooked together, dreamt together, and even marked locations in her tattered notebook titled, "Our Future House." It was all so beautifully innocent. Two souls clinging to love while the world prepared to rip them apart. But love was not blind. It was simply helpless. They both knew the danger that loomed. Damien's family had grown colder, crueler. Amara's aunt had started muttering about disgrace and shame. And yet, they stayed together. For them, even a single day was worth the risk. It was on one of those rainy nights, inside a dark classroom with leaky ceilings, that Damien whispered the words he had never dared say before. "Let's run, Amara. I have enough money saved. We can disappear." Amara had stared at him, wide-eyed, and asked only one question. "Would you come back for me, even if the world cursed us both?" He had kissed her like a vow and promised, "I will never leave you." But he did. Not by choice, but by force. That same week, his father's men ambushed him after class and dragged him home. He was locked in for days, his phone confiscated. And by the time he was released, he was on a plane bound for London with nothing but clothes and a broken heart. Amara had come looking for him, barefoot in the rain, holding the bracelet he gave her. When she reached the gate of the Obesai residence, she was spat on by the security guards and told, "He's gone, and he's never coming back." Alone, shamed, and with morning sickness clawing at her body, Amara returned home with her dreams shattered and a child forming inside her. She didn't tell her aunt immediately. She prayed. She hoped he'd return. But weeks turned into months. Her belly swelled. And the day she revealed the truth, her aunt screamed so loud the neighbors came running. "So you let one of those rich boys disgrace us? You opened your legs for someone who'll never marry you? You are cursed, Amara. Cursed." That night, Amara was thrown out. The same aunt who had raised her now shut the door with such force it echoed like thunder. Pregnant, homeless, and betrayed, Amara wandered for days, sleeping under motor parks and scavenging food from bins. No one cared. No one helped. Her eyes lost their shine. Her feet swelled. She eventually found shelter in an abandoned building where she gave birth alone, screaming into the night, her only company being rats and mosquitoes. Amara named the baby Chadinma, meaning God is good, not because she felt it at the time, but because she hoped it might become true. She wrapped the baby in the same scarf Damien once gifted her, and vowed never to let her know the pain of being rejected. For the first few years, she lived by the roadside near a mechanic workshop, washing cars in exchange for leftovers. She tied Chadinma to her back as she scrubbed tires and cleaned windshields. The little girl became a fixture in her life, a reason to breathe even when everything else told her not to. At night, Amara would sing to her, old songs from the village, tales of stars and strong women. She told Chadinma stories of a man who once made her feel seen. She didn't say his name, only referred to him as the light that left. But life in the streets was unforgiving. Every day came with hunger, every week with illness. Chadinma had frequent fevers, malaria, infections. Yet somehow the child survived. Amara would cradle her with trembling arms, whispering prayers even she no longer believed in. At one point, she tried to seek help from a government shelter, but was turned away after a social worker accused her of being a professional beggar. She was mocked, judged, and constantly asked, "Where's the father?" And each time, Amara would walk away in silence, carrying the weight of a love that had vanished. Then came the year of the cholera outbreak. The streets stank with death. Bodies lay covered in newspapers, and the hospitals overflowed. One day, Amara collapsed while fetching water. She was rushed to a clinic, but left unattended. She died 3 days later, quietly, painfully, with no one beside her but Chadinma, who clung to her lifeless body for 2 days before anyone noticed. The child, barely 5 years old, was taken to an overcrowded orphanage. There, she learned new lessons: how to survive, how to lie, how to run when hands reached too fast. The caretakers were cruel. The other children were worse. She was beaten, mocked, and starved. Her hair was shaved. Her name was forgotten. When she spoke of her mother, she was slapped for talking like a ghost. Eventually, she ran, just like her mother had. Only this time, no one chased her because no one cared. She survived by hiding under bridges, sleeping in unfinished buildings, and learning how to read people's faces before they yelled or hit. Trauma became her language. Fear, her closest friend. Over time, her mind began to break. The voices came. The laughter that wasn't hers. She would mutter to herself, sing to no one, and carry imaginary conversations. By the time she turned 18, she had become Omoza, the mad one. The baby she now carried wasn't from love, but pain. But she never let go. Just like her mother. The psychiatric doctors Damien hired said it would take time, years maybe, for Chadinma to fully regain herself. But Damien wasn't looking for miracles. He wasn't trying to make her perfect. He only wanted her safe. Every day he visited her in the facility, he brought a new item: a hair comb, a picture book, a dress, a soft toy for the baby. At first, she wouldn't touch them. But eventually, she began to speak again. Not full sentences, but words. Broken fragments of memory. Mama cried in the rain. Mama said he'd come back. Mama sang when we had no food. Damien listened. Sometimes he would cry silently in the car on his way home. He kept thinking of the life that could have been, the daughter he could have raised, the woman Amara could have become, all stolen by pride, wealth, and the arrogance of men like his father. He began to investigate further, retracing Amara's steps. He found the mechanic shop she worked at, the building she died in. He even located the doctor who signed her death certificate. The man barely remembered her. She came in late. No money. We were full. She died in the corner of the waiting room. Damien wept after that meeting. He wrote a silent apology in his journal that night, addressing it to Amara. I was too young to fight then, but I will fight now. He visited her grave, a simple unmarked cross in the back corner of a mass burial site. He paid to have the area cleaned, the grave exhumed, and a proper tombstone placed. On it he wrote, Amara Obinuju, a light the world rejected, a queen the earth forgot. As the weeks passed, Chadinma grew quieter but more present. The screams reduced. The baby, Zachora, now fed from warm bottles and slept in a proper cot. One day, she asked Damien, Do you believe in ghosts? He looked at her and replied, I believe in second chances. She nodded, then said softly, Mama said if I ever found someone who looked like you, I should forgive him. Damien held her hand and wept. He had been many things in life, wealthy, respected, feared, but never had he felt more human than in that moment, when the child of the woman he abandoned offered him grace. It was no longer about restitution. It was about healing, for her, for the baby, for Amara, and for the man who had built towers across Nigeria, only to discover his true foundation was buried in the heart of a madwoman, who was never mad at all. It had been 2 months since Chadinma was moved into the psychiatric rehabilitation facility, and in that time, Damien had visited her more than he'd visited his boardroom. She no longer shouted in her sleep or threw spoons at nurses. Instead, she sat by the window each morning with her baby cradled in one arm, humming tunes no one understood, until Damien recognized them. They were songs Amara used to sing. Her voice had the same rhythm, the same softness, even the same pauses Amara once made when she forgot a lyric. On a breezy Thursday morning, she turned to him and asked, Did Mama Amara really love him, or was she just lonely? Damien had frozen. The nurse, standing beside him, widened her eyes. What did you say? He whispered. Chadinma blinked, then looked away. I dreamt of her last night. She said he tried, but he wasn't strong enough to fight them. Damien sat beside her, swallowed hard, and answered gently. She wasn't lonely. She loved him with everything. That same afternoon, Damien requested to visit Chadinma's sleeping quarters. With permission granted, he stepped into the small, neat room where mother and child slept. Her baby, Zachora, lay quietly on a clean mattress. On the wall hung crayon drawings Chadinma had started making during therapy. One image caught Damien's eye, a man drawn beside a woman with long black hair and a baby between them. Above the drawing were the words, Mama said he had heaven in his eyes. Damien touched the wall with trembling fingers, unable to hold back his tears. So much of Amara lived in this broken child. This woman the world had mocked. This soul the world had cast aside. Her spirit had survived the storm. Through Chadinma, Amara had breathed again. That evening, as Damien drove home, his thoughts were no longer clouded with doubt. He knew, not just because of the songs or the drawings or the voice, but because every piece of Chadinma screamed of Amara's legacy. Yet, in a world that believed in documents more than hearts, he needed final proof. So he ordered the DNA test to be done, quietly, privately. The medical team returned to collect new samples from both him and Chadinma. She didn't fight it this time. When the needle pricked her finger, she smiled and whispered, Mama said blood always knows blood. The samples were sent off, and Damien entered a strange state of limbo. For years, he had buried his longing for a child under business and sterile reports. Now, every second dragged like an hour as he waited for a confirmation he already felt in his bones. On the third day, just after breakfast, his phone rang. The lab technician's voice was calm, Rehearsed clinical. Sir, the test results confirm with 99.98% certainty. She is your biological daughter. Damien said nothing. His phone slid from his hand. He dropped to the marble floor of his living room and wept like a baby, face buried in his palms, shoulders shaking, decades of grief pouring out in silence. For the first time in years, Chief Damien Obesai felt fear. Not the fear of loss, he'd lived with that, but the fear of not being enough. He had power, wealth, influence, and reach, but he did not have time travel. He couldn't go back and rewrite the years that Amara had suffered alone. He couldn't erase the pain Chadinma had faced, abuse, madness, starvation. All he could do now was try. Try to give her peace. Try to give her dignity. Try to give her back the future she had been robbed of. So that afternoon, after receiving the DNA results, he returned to the facility and asked to speak with Chadinma in private. She was drawing again, this time a woman standing in the rain. Damien sat beside her, knees bent, heart trembling. Chadinma, he said softly, I have something to tell you. She looked up, unsure, her face half lit by sunlight. What? She asked. He reached for her hand, warm and steady now, and whispered, You are my daughter, my blood, my everything. There was a long silence. The ceiling fan hummed. The baby stirred in the corner. Then Chadinma blinked slowly. I know, she said. Damien stared, stunned. You know. She nodded. Mama told me you'd come back one day. She said I'd see you in a place filled with light, but I'd be broken, and you'd be older, but I'd still know your voice. Her words cut through him. She wasn't mad. She had never truly been mad. She was damaged, yes, but deep inside her remained the memory of love, the voice of her mother echoing even after death. Damien's eyes welled up. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracking. I should have fought for her. I should have come back. I didn't even know you existed. Chadinma reached out with both hands and touched his face. But you came now, and Mama said the ones who return after storms are the ones worth forgiving. They wept together, and it wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was quiet, cleansing, and sacred, like rivers finally meeting after a long drought. Damien made a promise to her then, not just to restore her, but to give her and her son the world. He promised to carry her name like a crown, to rebuild what was broken, to make sure her mother's death was never in vain. Chadinma didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for houses or clothes. All she asked for was one thing. Will you visit her grave with me? She whispered. Damien nodded, holding her hands tight. Yes, as many times as you want. We'll go together. In that moment, their bond was sealed, not by blood or documents, but by grief, redemption, and the sacred weight of truth finally spoken between father and daughter. Damien couldn't stop looking at her, not with pity, but wonder. In the following days, he spent nearly every hour by her side. He brought journals and books, and helped her rebuild pieces of her mind through storytelling. Chadinma was no longer the madwoman from the market. She was a woman healing, a survivor reclaiming fragments of her soul. Nurses whispered about the miracle in the private ward. Other patients, once afraid of her, now greeted her with smiles. The baby, Zachora, grew stronger, chubbier, more cheerful. Damien carried him everywhere, even to board meetings, ignoring raised brows. My grandson, he'd say simply. No one dared ask questions. No one needed to. Damien was no longer the cold billionaire obsessed with profits. He was a father in awe of the grace he had been given. A second chance. A legacy he never dreamed would come through someone once branded mad. At a closed family gathering, his first in years, he stood up during dinner and announced, I have a daughter. The room froze. Gasps escaped. His younger sister choked on her wine. What do you mean, brother? Is she legitimate? He slammed his palm on the table. She is mine. And she is more legitimate than any of you who watched me suffer alone for decades. His voice shook the walls. His uncles protested. But you told us you were sterile. How can she be yours? He pulled out the DNA result and threw it on the table. Ask the blood. Ask God. And with that, he walked out, leaving behind the politics of inheritance and family honor. That night, alone in his garden, he cried again, not just for Amara or Chadinma or Zecora, but for himself. For the boy he once was. The one who believed love would be enough. The one who was dragged away from it. In the solitude of that moment, Damien made another vow. He would not only be present, he would be intentional. He would give Chadinma every opportunity her mother had lost. He would make sure Zecora grew in a world of dignity and protection. He would right the wrongs of silence, arrogance, and delay. And he would never allow his blood to be mocked again. The newspapers began to buzz when Damien filed legal papers to adopt Chadinma and declare her his heir. Billionaire claims madwoman his daughter, the headline screamed. But Damien smiled at them all. Let the world laugh, he said, because I know they're not laughing at her. They're laughing because they don't understand the power of mercy. And deep down, he didn't care. For once, his empire meant nothing compared to the treasure he had almost lost forever. It was strange, almost sacred. How much could change in just a few months? Chadinma, once feared as the madwoman who prowled the streets with dirt-stained feet and haunted eyes, now stood in front of the mirror, wearing a soft peach dress that rested gently on her skin. Her hair, trimmed and styled in neat twists, framed her delicate face, and her once shaking hands were now steady as she touched a bracelet on her wrist, the same bracelet her mother had worn, now restored and polished by Damien's personal jeweler. She stood beside her baby's crib, humming as she wiped Zecora's mouth after his feeding. Her mind still trembled sometimes, especially when the room got too quiet or when thunder roared in the distance, but the clouds were slowly parting. Therapy was helping. Compassion was healing. And most importantly, love, the thing that had been stolen from her before she even understood what it meant, was returning. Damien had transformed an entire wing of his estate into a private apartment just for her. No luxury was spared. The walls were painted with warm pastels, filled with children's books, teddy bears, and framed quotes from her mother's favorite authors. A small bookshelf held Amara's recovered belongings, her notebook, her letters, her only known photograph. At night, Damien would sit in the living room and tell Chadinma stories of Amara in university. How she once beat him in a debate competition. How she used to eat roasted corn before every exam because she believed it gave her village wisdom. How she once wrote him a poem that ended with, "Even if the world calls you king, I only want the man who wipes my tears with his handkerchief." Chadinma would listen in silence, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. "I used to feel I had nothing," she whispered one night. "But now I feel like I've come home." Yet for all the healing inside, the world outside was not so forgiving. Rumors spread fast. People posted her pictures before and after recovery, side by side, like she was a makeover project. Headlines spun everything. Billionaire claims street woman as daughter, and from gutter to glory. Meet the madwoman now living in a mansion. Damien tried to shield her, but the media frenzy had begun. Some mocked her. Others doubted her story. How can a madwoman be the daughter of the great Damien Obesai? Trolls sneered. Chadinma, once invisible, had become a curiosity. "They don't know me," she told Damien, hurt but composed. "They only know what I survived, not who I was." Damien placed a hand on her shoulder and replied, "Then let's show them who you are, and who your mother was. Because they deserve to remember her name too." The press conference was Damien's idea. Not to parade his daughter like a trophy, but to shut down the noise before it destroyed her progress. "Let me speak once, and then the world can hush," he told his staff. It was held in the marble atrium of Obesai Holdings, with cameras rolling and journalists buzzing. Damien stepped onto the podium wearing a dark native attire with a simple string of coral beads, a quiet nod to his roots and to Amara's memory. Chadinma stood behind him in a long gown of soft blue, holding Zecora in her arms. There were no bodyguards, no media handlers, just truth, standing against a crowd that was hungry for spectacle. Damien took a breath, looked directly into the cameras, and began. "Years ago, I loved a woman named Amara. But because she was poor, my family tore us apart. I was taken abroad. I never saw her again. I was told she moved on. They lied." He paused, his voice tightening. I found out recently that she died many years ago, alone in pain and abandoned. And the child she had, my child, was left to suffer in a world that spat on her. She became a victim of trauma, madness, and rejection. That child is this woman beside me, my daughter, Chadinma. And this baby she carries is my grandson. I say this not for your applause. I say it to shut every mouth that will dare question her worth again. The room fell into stunned silence. Not a flashbulb flickered. Damien continued, softer this time. We cannot undo the years that broke her, but we can stop the ones who still want to mock her. From this day forward, she is no longer a headline. She is not a former madwoman. She is a survivor, a daughter, a mother, my blood. And if you shame her again, you shame me. The statement went viral within hours. Social media split into sides, some in awe, some in disbelief. Hashtags like hashtag Chadinma Deseit and hashtag Justice for Amara trended for days. Celebrities praised Damien for his courage. Human rights activists applauded him. But trolls didn't stop. It's all fake. He's using her for PR. She's probably not even mad, just an actress. Yet Damien didn't respond. He took Chadinma and Zakora on a short trip to a private resort instead. They walked barefoot on the beach, ate fresh fish, laughed. He watched his daughter play with her child in the water and felt peace for the first time in decades. Let the world argue, he said, holding a sleeping Zakora in his arms. They weren't there when you were starving in the gutter. They didn't lose you like I did. They don't deserve our pain. And that was how he chose to live, from truth, not noise. It was a quiet Sunday morning when it happened. Damien was seated in the garden, trimming roses, a hobby he'd picked up recently, one that helped him feel grounded again. Chadinma walked out with Zakora in a baby carrier strapped to her front, wearing a soft yellow dress that danced in the breeze. Her scars had faded. Her voice was firmer. Her eyes, once lost, now focused clearly. She carried herself not as a victim of pity, but as a woman regaining her voice. She sat beside Damien, plucked a hibiscus flower, and placed it in her hair. Mama loved these, she said, smiling. And then, like sunlight piercing through a crack in the clouds, she laughed. Not a bitter cackle, not a hysterical howl, but a soft, full melodic laugh. Damien froze, stunned. It was the first time he had heard her truly laugh. Not from memory. Not from madness, but from joy. He reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed his fingers. I dreamt of her again, she said. She wasn't crying this time. She was dancing, holding a baby. Maybe it was me, or maybe it was Zakora, but she looked happy. Damien swallowed a lump in his throat. She would be happy, seeing you now, seeing the strength you've become. Chadinma looked up at the sky. Do you think people like us can be whole again, after everything we lose? Damien paused, then answered, I don't know if we ever get back all we lose. But I think we can build new things, things that matter. You have your child. I have you. And that's something neither time nor cruelty can take. She nodded slowly, wiping a tear from her eye, and said, then let's keep building. From that day forward, they began to live, not just exist. Chadinma enrolled in a literacy program for adult women and scored the highest in her class. She attended therapy sessions weekly and eventually spoke on a radio program about the stigmas around mental health. Damien funded a foundation in Amara's name, not a flashy one, but a simple shelter for young mothers living on the street, offering food, clean beds, and education. Chadinma visited often. Sometimes she'd cradle a newborn and whisper, I see you. You'll be okay. Other times she'd just sit with the girls and listen. No one asked about her past. They didn't need to. Her presence alone was a story of redemption. And as each day passed, her laugh grew fuller, her voice stronger, and her smile, her real smile, became the softest victory the world had ever seen. Zakora's naming ceremony was unlike anything Chief Damien Deseit had ever organized. Not because it was grand. No, this one was intimate, personal, spiritual. But because for once, it wasn't about wealth, status, or impressing Lagos elites. It was about healing generations. It was about restoring dignity to the dead, light to the broken, and pride to a name once buried in shame. The ceremony was held not in a ballroom, but in Damien's garden, the same one where he and Chadinma often sat. White and yellow roses lined the path to the gazebo. Elderly women from the community, some who remembered Amara from her university days, were invited to bless the child. Damien didn't invite politicians. He invited survivors, women who had once been thrown out, men who had once lost daughters. The energy was raw, pure, and soaked in the silent language of restoration. Chadinma wore a flowing cream gown with soft embroidery at the neckline, her hair tied into elegant cornrows. She held Zecora close, and when the officiant asked her what name the child would bear, she answered clearly, Zecora Damien Chukwudike Obesai. There was a gasp from some guests, but no one dared interrupt. Damien stood beside her, pride etched on his face. Zecora means show the world, she said, turning to the guests. Because he will show the world that from brokenness, beauty can rise. That from madness, sanity can be reclaimed. That from the forgotten corners of Lagos, a king can still emerge. The crowd erupted in soft applause. Tears were wiped. Heads bowed. Damien reached for his grandson and cradled him like a fragile glass of hope. This is the child I never knew I needed, he whispered into the infant's ear. And now I'll never let go. After the ceremony, guests stayed behind to eat roasted yam and catfish, to dance softly to traditional Igbo music, and to celebrate not just the baby, but the rebirth of an entire legacy. Damien watched from the sidelines, lost in reflection. This baby wasn't just his heir, he was his anchor. The child that reconnected him to a woman he had loved with everything. The child who arrived through fire, madness, hunger, and fate. He had once feared dying alone, with his wealth divided among cousins who never cared about his heart. But now, he no longer feared death. He feared only wasting a single moment with this family. Fate had returned to him. And as he held Zecora that evening, rocking him to sleep beneath the swaying trees, he made another vow. You will know your mother's name. You will know her strength. And the world will never call you bastard, because your roots run deeper than gold. Chadinma stood at the gate of the Amara's shelter for forgotten mothers, clutching a bouquet of white lilies and a file folder pressed tightly to her chest. The building was small, just a 6-room facility nestled on a quiet street in Surulere. But to her, it was the most sacred place she'd ever stepped into. It had taken weeks of meetings, documents, inspections, and approvals, all funded and supported by her father. But the vision was hers. The drive came from memories too painful to speak of, the years of being called mad, of being rejected with a baby on her back, of sleeping under wooden stalls with her arms curled around a child too small to defend himself. She had dreamt of this place during her worst nights at the facility, whispering ideas to herself as therapy peeled back her layers. And now the dream stood before her, with a brass plaque on the wall that read, "In honor of Amara, a woman the world failed." Inside, beds were already made, teddy bears lined in wooden shelves, and 2 counselors walked through the halls preparing for their first residence. Women who had been cast out for carrying children of rape. Girls rejected by their families for getting pregnant before marriage. Chadinma didn't need to ask for their stories. She already knew them. That night, as the first 3 young women arrived, one carrying a newborn, another heavily pregnant, and a third barely speaking, Chadinma received them not with papers or questions, but with hugs. "You're home," she said softly. "You're safe here. No cameras, no press, no headlines. Just safety. Just dignity. Just the thing her mother had been denied when she was forced to birth a child in filth, alone and unloved." As the days passed, Chadinma continued her own education, now with a tutor who came twice a week. She studied quietly, often reading aloud to Zecora during feeding times. Damien watched her grow, amazed by her discipline. She began writing journals, poems, and reflections. "There's so much I want to say," she once told him. "Not to shout or defend myself, but to testify, to remind the world that we're more than the stories they gave us." Damien moved beyond words, commissioned a publisher to compile her writings into a small book titled the daughter they forgot. It was released with little fanfare, but quickly spread. Readers described it as a voice that breaks chains. She was invited to speak at youth centers, but only accepted one invitation, at a local school near the orphanage she once fled from. "I don't want fame," she told Damien. "I want change." And every word she spoke carried the fire of a woman who had walked through hell, but chose not to burn. The path to Amara's grave had once been overgrown, a forgotten patch of earth hidden behind rusted gates and a cracked wall. But now, the ground was paved with fresh gravel, lined with lavender and ixora bushes, and shaded by an old almond tree that whispered as wind passed through its leaves. Damien had spared no expense in transforming the site. A marble headstone now marked the resting place, engraved in bold, gold letters. Amara Obinuju, she loved. She fought. She endured. Beneath it sat a bench and a small round table with a Bible and a picture of her holding a baby, digitally reconstructed from memories and sketches. It was here that Damien and Chadinma came, hand in hand, dressed in white, holding Zecora between them. The air was thick with silence, but not grief, something deeper. A quiet, holy reverence. As they knelt beside the grave, Damien's lips trembled. "Amara," he began, his voice low, "I failed you. I was a coward. I let them take me away, and I didn't fight hard enough. You died alone. You suffered because of me. And I can't take that pain back," his voice cracked. "But I found her, our daughter. She is extraordinary." He looked at Chadinma, who gently placed a lily on the grave. "Mama," she said softly, "you were right. He came back. You said he would look for me. You told me to forgive him if he ever returned. And I did." A long silence followed, broken only by the rustling of trees and the distant chirp of birds. Chadinma laid her head on Damien's shoulder. Zecora, now a year old, clapped his hands and babbled, reaching toward the headstone as if greeting a spirit only he could see. They spent hours there, telling stories, Damien about their days in university, Chadinma about her dreams and her new mission with the shelter. Before leaving, Chadinma placed a folded letter in a waterproof envelope beneath the flowers. "It's my first letter to you, Mama," she said, tears shining in her eyes. "But it won't be my last." As they walked back to the car, Damien turned around once more to look at the grave. "I'll never leave her again," he whispered, as though Amara could hear him. "And I'll never let the world forget you." That night, when Chadinma closed her eyes to sleep, she dreamt of her mother, not crying or sick, but standing tall beneath the almond tree, smiling. Behind her stood a boy with bright eyes. "That's your future," Amara said, pointing at Zecora. "Now go protect it." And Chadinma smiled in her sleep, the full peace of her mother's approval settling deep in her soul. It was a full year since the world first saw her snatch food from a billionaire's hand. A full year since whispers filled the streets of Lagos. "Did you hear? That madwoman, she's now a princess in a palace." But this time, no one whispered. This time, there were only wide eyes and warm greetings as Chadinma stepped out of the sleek black car in front of the same restaurant where it all began. She wore a modest but elegant teal ankara gown, her hair in a braided crown, with Zecora walking beside her in matching fabric and polished shoes. Beside her stood Chief Damien Obesai, dressed in white native wear with gold trimming and holding a small flower in one hand. The staff of the restaurant, who once looked on in fear, now rushed forward with bright smiles and respect. The manager himself ran out to welcome them, stammering through his greeting. "Sir, Ma, welcome. We didn't know you'd honor us again." Damien nodded kindly and responded, "A place of pain must also become a place of healing." They sat at the exact table from a year ago, under the same umbrella shade, beside the same little flower garden where a camera once captured a madwoman lunging for a roasted chicken. But this time she didn't steal. This time she was served. And when the waiter brought the tray and set the food down, roasted chicken, jollof rice, and cold zobo, Chadinma burst into soft laughter. Damien looked at her and smiled knowingly. "Funny how it started with bread," he said, tearing a piece from the hot loaf in front of him. She nodded, her eyes watering. "But you gave me more than food. You gave me back my life." She took the bread gently and tore it in two, handing one half to Damien, the other to Zecora. "Eat," she whispered to her son, "not because you're hungry, but because we're whole." The boy bit into it happily, crumbs falling on his cheeks. Chadinma leaned forward and kissed his forehead. Passers-by watched in awe, some recognizing her, others wondering who this graceful woman was who carried herself like she ruled the world. And, in a way, she did. As they finished the meal, Damien stood and raised his glass of water. "To Amara," he said, "to the woman who gave us life through her suffering, to the woman whose blood runs through this child, and whose fire burns in your heart." Chadinma raised hers, "to second chances, and to the broken who choose to heal." Zecora raised his plastic cup and shouted, "To Mama." And they all laughed, the sound echoing far beyond the restaurant walls. When they left, they did not sneak away like outcasts. They walked boldly, father, daughter, and grandson, 3 generations bound by pain but strengthened by love. And for those who still whispered behind them, who still doubted their bond, Chadinma had only one thing to say, whispered under her breath as she carried her child on her back. "They once called me mad, now they call me Obesai." And with her head high and her son's arms wrapped tight around her, she walked into a future her mother never got to see, but surely had prayed for in the dark. Her madness was gone. Her royalty had begun. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.